The cafeteria of Nexus Station buzzed with the typical chatter of a dozen different species, their various clicks, whistles, and harmonics creating a symphony of interstellar communication. James sat at his usual corner table, methodically eating his protein rations while reviewing star charts on his datapad. His presence barely registered among the other students at the Galactic Academy, exactly how he preferred it. At 17 standard years, James was unremarkable by human standards: average height, brown hair, quiet demeanor. What the other species didn't understand was that unremarkable for a human from Earth meant something entirely different than unremarkable for beings from civilized worlds. Liza approached his table with her tray, her blonde hair catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the station's massive viewports. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, though she was already settling into the chair across from him. "Course not," James replied without looking up from his charts. Liza was one of the few humans at the academy, having arrived from the mining colonies of Proxima Centauri just last semester. Unlike James, she hadn't grown up on humanity's homeworld. What the galactic community had designated as a class toward the Deathworld. "You hear about the new transfer students?" Liza asked, stabbing at her synthetic vegetables with more force than necessary. James finally looked up. 3 Zephyrians had entered the cafeteria, their crystalline exoskeletons catching the light as they moved with predatory grace. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their forearms ending in razor-sharp claws that could slice through steel plating. The Zephyrian Empire was known throughout the galaxy for producing the finest warriors, their homeworld's low gravity and abundant predators creating beings that were fast, strong, and utterly without mercy. "Heard they're here on some kind of exchange program," James said, returning to his charts. "Military assessment or something." The lead Zephyrian's compound eyes swept the cafeteria before settling on their table. His mandibles clicked in what James recognized as amusement. The trio approached with the fluid confidence of apex predators who had never encountered anything they couldn't kill. "Deathworlders," the leader said in heavily accented standard. "Galactic." His voice carried the harsh undertones of his species like grinding metal. "We have heard much about your kind." Liza tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the emergency beacon on her belt. James simply continued eating, not bothering to acknowledge the newcomers. "I am Crixtal of the 7th Hunting Pack," the Zephyrian continued, his secondary arms gesturing in elaborate threat displays. "My companions are Veltar and Nexus. We have come to see if the stories of human resilience are exaggerated." "We're just trying to eat," Liza said carefully. "Maybe you could—" "The female speaks," Crixtal interrupted, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a grin. But the male remained silent. Perhaps he understands his place in the natural order. Other students had begun to notice the confrontation, conversations dying as various species turned to watch. The academy's staff were notably absent. Change wouldn't occur for another hour. Crixtal leaned down, bringing his razor-edged face closer to James. "Your world may be classified as dangerous, little human, but you are far from its protection now. Here, strength determines hierarchy." James set down his fork and finally looked up. His brown eyes met Crixtal's compound gaze without flinching. "You done?" The simple question, delivered in a tone of mild annoyance, seemed to enrage the Zephyrian. His claws extended fully and his hunting pack flanked the table. "You dare show such disrespect? On Zephyr Prime I have killed creatures that would devour you in seconds." "Neat," James replied, picking up his fork again. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the station's environmental systems seemed muted as every being present focused on the confrontation. Liza's breathing had become shallow, her fight-or-flight instincts screaming warnings that James appeared to completely ignore. Crixtal's patience finally snapped. With a motion too fast for most species to follow, he lunged forward, all 4, arms extended to pin James to his chair while his mandibles prepared to deliver a killing blow to the human's neck. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiology classes for decades. James didn't stand up. He didn't even drop his fork. Instead, His free hand moved with casual precision, catching Krixtal's primary right arm and twisting with what appeared to be minimal effort. The sound of crystalline exoskeleton cracking echoed through the silent cafeteria like breaking glass. Krixtal's scream was unlike anything the assembled students had ever heard, a harmonic shriek that spoke of pain beyond comprehension. In less than 2 seconds, James had twisted the Zephyrian's arm completely around, the razor claws now pointing directly at their owner's throat. "The thing about Deathworlders," James said conversationally, still holding his fork, "is that we don't just survive our planet's dangers. We're shaped by them." He applied the slightest additional pressure, and Krixtal's struggles ceased entirely. The other 2 Zephyrians had frozen, their predator instincts recognizing a superior threat. "Earth's gravity is 3 times what you're used to," James continued, his voice never rising above normal conversation levels. "Every day of our lives, we're fighting forces that would crush most species. Our reflexes develop to handle predators that make your homeworld's fauna look like house pets." Liza stared in fascination and horror as James maintained his grip with negligent ease. The most feared warriors in the galaxy, beings who could tear through battle armor, were completely immobilized by a teenager who hadn't even bothered to stand up. "But the real thing about humans," James said, finally meeting Krixtal's pain-filled gaze, "is that we generally prefer not to use these advantages. We'd rather just eat our lunch in peace." He released his grip, and Krixtal collapsed to the floor, cradling his shattered arm. The other 2 Zephyrians immediately moved to help their pack leader, their earlier aggression replaced by something James had rarely seen in a warrior species: genuine fear. "Medical bays on level 7, James offered helpfully, returning to his star charts. "They've got good reconstructive facilities." The 3 Zephyrians retreated without another word, Krixtal's whimpering echoing through the corridors as they disappeared. Gradually, the normal sounds of the cafeteria resumed, though James noticed the other students giving his table significantly more space than before. Liza remained seated, staring at him with newfound understanding. "You knew exactly what you were doing the entire time," she said finally. James shrugged, finishing the last of his protein rations. "Dad always said the best way to handle bullies is to be so boring they lose interest. When that doesn't work?" He gestured vaguely at the space where the Zephyrians had been. "Remind me never to make you angry," Liza said with a nervous laugh. "Takes a lot to make me angry," James replied, standing and collecting his tray. "But interrupting my meal planning definitely doesn't help." As they left the cafeteria together, neither of them noticed the small crowd of xenobiology students who had recorded the entire encounter, or how quickly the footage would spread throughout the galactic academic network. By the end of the week, enrollment applications to study on Earth had increased by 4,000%, though the mortality waivers required for Deathworld visitation meant few would ever be approved. James, meanwhile, had already forgotten about the incident entirely. He had more important things to worry about, like whether the cafeteria would finally stock those Earth-imported apples his mom kept sending him messages about. After all, a growing boy needed proper nutrition,